Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Project Transition's High Performing Athlete and Mental Health Interview Series. I am Dr. Lakendra Smith, Health Sector Director of Project Transition under the leadership of Dr. Joaquin Wallace. Today, our guest for this series is former South Carolina track star Jackie Johnson, sports physiologist, licensed massage therapist, wellness coach. Jackie, thank you for interviewing with us and welcome.
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be a part of this interview. So, yes, let's get started.
So, for those of us who don't know much about you, please fill us in. Tell us who you are.
I am originally from Atlanta, Georgia. I went to the University of South Carolina, where I was SEC champion, All-American, school record holder in the 60-meter hurdles, and kind of transitioned out of track and field into the sports side of things. I always knew I wanted to be in some type of sports rehab arena. I was never that 9-to-5er. I had to be outside somewhere around athletes. Those were my people. And so I transitioned. One of the biggest mentors or influences on my career was we had a chiropractor / LMT by the name of Danny, and he told me about a school that he was a part of, and it was Southeastern Massage School. So I started my massage career there, and that kind of plummeted me into the world of sports physiology, and I never looked back. My first job was with Evander Holyfield. Surprisingly, he had a track team for up and coming athletes that didn't get those major sponsorships. And so I was their lead massage therapist and kind of followed them all around the country and the world, helping them out with their sports rehab. And then got a call from University of South Carolina asking if I was interested in coaching. Since I was pretty young, I was that liaison between the older coaches and the younger athletes. And so I took that gig and wearing the hat of coach and sports rehab all at once. So it's been an interesting ride.
You know, honestly, when you start thinking about great athletes, this is my personal opinion, very seldom do you see great athletes turn into great coaches. How were you able to transition mentally from being the athlete, the competitor, to being the coach, the developer?
One of the greatest compliments that my former boss, Coach Curtis Fry, said was my ability to communicate and to relate to the athletes. I wasn't so far removed where I understood what they needed as far as what they needed to be told, as far as being motivated and being put in the right position to be at their best performance. And so it was very interesting. The good thing about my career is I've had the privilege to be around a lot of great coaches. And it started with my track team here in Atlanta. Shout out to Quicksilver Track Club. We started at a very young age, goal setting and visualization and things of that nature. And so all of those skills that I gained at a very young age, I kind of transitioned that into my coaching philosophy on the collegiate level. If you're able to see yourself in those positions, then you can kind of manifest yourself and be able to run the times and meet those goals. And so one of the biggest attributes were I brought goal setting, visualization, and I was able to communicate and relate to the student athletes.
If you had a starting five of coaches that were very instrumental in shaping your coaching philosophy, name the coach and name that top trait that you took from them to help you become the coach that you are.
Ooh, that's good. First and foremost, I would have to give props to Ernest Dixon. He was our foundation. He started us off with those goal setting and celebrating victories. That was another thing that a lot of times we kind of look over. And a lot of this stuff has progressed into some of the businesses that I've started as well. But definitely the goal setting, visualization, and celebrating your small victories. Also having short-term memory. The great thing about sports is if you have a bad event, there's always another event or another meet or another competition where you can forget about that bad event that you just had and you can make it right. You have to be very forgetful as a student athlete. You can't hold on to it or you won't get anywhere. The next would probably be Wendy Trevelyan. She's still very active with USATF on the senior level, but she was the person who showed me what aggressiveness and drive and just that dog and that hunger and that fight. Because I've always kind of been an even keel type person, emotionally regulated person. So I've always kind of been calm, but she was one of those people who were able to get me out of that calm demeanor and kind of work that dog out of me. So Wendy Trevelyan, I definitely have to give her props. Curtis Fry, he's kind of like my second father, the person who hired me over at South Carolina. I was one of his first recruiting class at the University of South Carolina. So I've grown up with him and we've been through it all. So he continued on that foundation. He helped me to explore who I was as a young lady moving into adulthood. And so just going through the growing pains of an athlete and also believing like he saw my potential and he put me in a crazy training group with Melissa Morrison and then later on Anjanette Kirkland. So we had some of the best hurdlers in the world, which was why I picked the University of South Carolina because the training group was just outrageous. So you couldn't fail there unless you just didn't try. Who else? Deletia Quarles. She was one of the female assistant coaches at the University of South Carolina as well. And she was just, I felt like a silent, loud presence. And she was just our rock. She made sure that we were seen and we were heard. And even though she wasn't my event coach, just her presence and her mentorship was just always something that I've always treasured. We still communicate and I love her to death. And last but not least, I would probably say Coach Kevin Brown. He wasn't my event coach as well. He got there at the tail end of my career, but he was also like a silent presence as well. He made sure we stayed in line. Even as I transitioned into a young coach, he made sure I lived up to the expectation of being a young coach. And so I really appreciate his direction and his mentorship and how he looked out for me in that realm too. So
That's awesome. So I know you mentioned in your response, but with you being from Atlanta, right down the street from Athens, Georgia, Georgia Tech is right there in your backyard.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get to South Carolina?
Well, I always knew I wasn't going to stay in Georgia. To be honest, I was trying to get as far away from here as possible. I thought I was going to Texas A&M, to be honest. Luckily, I had one more visit. I left it kind of open. I took some visits to Nebraska, Florida State. I went to Hampton and Texas A&M, and I left the last one kind of open up in the air because I still wasn't quite decided on where I wanted to go. And then my coach, Ernest Dixon from a summer track club, was like, well, have you considered South Carolina? And I was like, South Carolina? No. And I kind of did some research and saw who was the coach and who was training down there and who he coached. And I was like, okay, well, it's a no-brainer. I knew before I even took the recruiting visit that I was going to end at South Carolina. It made perfect sense.
So clearly you were a standout athlete. Talk to us more about your collegiate career.
My freshman year, it was a standout year, actually. That was the year I broke the 55 indoor record, and I just ran some amazing times. Unfortunately, I got injured that outdoor season, so I kind of sat that out with a torn hamstring. But it's very interesting during college. I kind of played with some things. That's what I love about sports is what you put into it, that's what you get out of it. And I had the crazy idea. My sophomore year, we had one of the top recruiting classes in the country. So we had some amazing athletes that came in. And luckily, I didn't have to run all the events that I ran my freshman year. So I was really excited. So I could just focus on my hurdle races. After that, freshman group came in and I saw their work ethic because I was naturally gifted. I didn't have to work hard to be pretty good. And I tested myself out. I was like, you know what? Let's switch some things out. Let's do this summer workout plan. Let's do all the extra things and let's just see what happens. And so that was going into the summer of my junior year where I almost dropped a whole second. For hurdlers, we want to get under that 13-second mark. And so I was able to do that. I was able to qualify for Olympic trials. It was just a wonderful season for me. I was even in the race where Gail Devers broke the American record. It was so phenomenal. I was remember running the race. I was like, hey, she is flying. And so it was just a beautiful year. It was a long season, but me knowing that putting all that work in pays off, it put a lot of things in perspective. Whenever I get my mind to doing something, there's nothing that I can't take care of. My senior year, that was when I won indoor SEC title. And so that was a pretty big deal. Outdoor season was a little bit shaky and also got All American honors that year as well. By the end of outdoor season, my senior year, I just got that what we call senioritis, and I was just ready to be done and just sit down somewhere. So, yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned an injury your freshman year. It's also interesting that you came out blazing your freshman year. Sometimes it's very difficult to get the right mindset or even maintain that starting out. But then you have the injury, right? What was the catalyst for you in dealing with this injury? And what was it that clicked for you that said, okay, I need to do X, Y, and Z to make sure that I can perform at this level?
The reason I think I did very well my freshman year, sometimes ignorance is not always a bad thing. I was very unaware of who was around me and all the talent that was around me at LSU and the young lady from Vanderbilt. Like, I didn't understand or I didn't know because the internet and Mouse Split and all these other platforms where you can kind of look up who is your competition and what they're running, that wasn't around. And so it was pure ignorance of not getting that anxiety about who's around me and just being focused in my lane and being able to do what I know I could do. That was a huge part of it, to be honest. I think too, once you start to understand who's around you and their potential, that's when you start to kind of gain a little bit of that anxiety and kind of doubt yourself and doubt your training and all of that stuff. But my success came from a lot of the ignorance. I just went out there and did what I knew I could do, and I stayed in my lane. And so I wish I took that same philosophy with me, unfortunately. As far as that other class, it wasn't just them, it was the people that I surrounded myself with, as far as other student athletes as well. That's why your community is very important, who you surround yourself with as far as friendships and things of that nature. But just watching the younger class, like they had the same mentality. They were fresh and raw. So it was kind of like that same ignorance. And they were kind of coming in doing what they knew. And then they were competing against each other. And they brought this competitive spirit. Just watching that, it's like, let me step my game up. I can't let these young kids come in here and take over. And so for some reason, I've always been put in that leadership role. When you're in that leadership role, you actually do have to step up. And so that was one of the things that I wanted to make sure I took advantage of. You give me a role, I'm going to make sure that I do it to the best of my ability. And so that was some of the things that changed my mindset of how I approach training at the University of South Carolina.
So you mentioned anxiety. How did you deal with that, especially during that time frame where people didn't really place a lot of emphasis on mental health? There weren't really a lot of resources accessible to especially athletes. How did you cope with anxiety and nervousness?
I have a funny story about that. At a very young age, I started to gain success in track. And one of my first interactions with being in the spotlight was there was a news article when I think I was about 10 or 11. And the interviewer asked me, state your full name. And in between my first and last name, I paused and said, and they printed in the newspaper, Jacqueline Madison. And so all the older kids that were in the same article, they made fun of me and all of this stuff. I think that was kind of like my beginning of anxiousness, especially with being in a spotlight. I kind of took that trauma with me as I went through the ranks. Luckily, being a female athlete in track and field, the big sports were football and basketball, so we didn't get a lot of publication on the track side of things. But moving into college, in the collegiate realm, things were a little bit different. If you were on top, they interviewed you and all of those things. And I just wanted to run track. I didn't want to do all that other stuff that came with it. I think a lot of that anxiety may have limited me mentally from what I could have become. I don't think I even touched on my potential of what I should have done just because I didn't want to be in the spotlight. I remember being asked when I was in high school, okay, you're going to the University of South Carolina. Have you thought about going into the Olympics? Because that was right after the Olympics left Atlanta in 96. And I was like, no, I just want to focus on what's at hand. And now that's college. So let's focus on that and we'll think about the other stuff later. So I think too, I just put limits on myself because I didn't want to deal with all the other things that came with success. Even now, that's one of my goals. I am open to all the things that success brings me because I think I still carry a little bit of that anxiety with being in a spotlight. That's why I don't do a lot of social media and things of that nature. And so even this interview, this is kind of like out of my comfort zone, but I'm doing it. And so that is the goal of this year, just stepping out of my comfort zone, doing more things like this, and hopefully that inspires other people to do the same.
So, retrospectively, what resources do you believe would have assisted you to overcome that hump? Or is there anything that you believe could have assisted you?
I will say South Carolina was ahead of the ball. We did have mental health counselors, and I do know when I came back to coach, they even started traveling with the team. They did a really great job of making sure that we had people available for us to speak to whenever we did. Of course, unfortunately, I can't speak for the whole Black community, but coming up from where I'm from, we didn't really speak to mental health professionals like that. We prayed about it and we figured it out. And so that wasn't something that I was familiar with at the time, but now I take advantage of it by all means at this point in my life.
So, you finished at South Carolina,
Mhm.
and unlike most athletes, you were very much aware that your career was going to come to an end. It had a life cycle, and you knew that you were going to do something else. Most of the time in these interviews, most of these athletes, they spend most of their life focusing on being an athlete. They never think about the transition. And so that's very, very interesting because that probably puts you in a drastically different category than everybody else. Why was your mindset so different?
My mindset was different because I spoke a little bit on it. I didn't want what came with that fame. I did try to run track. I ran professionally for 1 year. And to be honest, if you don't have a deal and if you're a sprinter in the US, if you're not the top three, you're not really making money. And especially back then in the late 90s, early 2000s, it's so competitive here and it's so hard to make money. I'm like, I got to make a living. I definitely knew that in my mind, I thought I was going to school for physical therapy. That's what I thought I was going to do. But after my 4 years, I was so mentally and physically exhausted. I was like, yeah, let's do something where I don't have to reach for things or really stretch myself too thin. And so I wanted to keep working. I was in the exercise physiology realm, working with geriatric clients who were newly diagnosed with chronic diseases or who had pre-existing conditions and kind of work with them on an exercise plan and all of that. But I knew I wanted to be working with athletes in the sports realm of things. And so the avenue of massage kind of came to me and I went and sat into a open house and I was like, yeah, let's do this. Most of it was anatomy physiology, what I had already taken the first 2 years of school. And so I was like, that'll be a review. The hardest part is kind of learning the technique and getting down all the things that kind of comes with that.
So, what was the most difficult part about your transition from athletics to career?
The most difficult was just finding where I fit. Initially, right out of school, you want to go get a job really quickly. So I went and worked in a day spa and I hated it because it was totally not what I wanted to do. And luckily, by my connections that I made previously, I was able to transition over into the Evander Holyfield Track Club. But yeah, it was just kind of figuring out where and when, how I want my career to look, when that is going to happen and when it's going to transition into that. And it took a minute to kind of do that, but it eventually went there. So I was excited about it.
That's a great question because you do a lot of things. So, how do you want your career to look?
Because I've been doing the sports physiology, soft tissue work for so long, and I've been traveling and doing a lot of things, I am ready to kind of sit down, rest my body. And that work is very demanding on the body. That's where wellness coaching kind of comes in. I'm transitioning all the things that I've gained from being a coach, from being a sports physiologist, from working with the sports medical support staff at the University of South Carolina, as well as the University of Oregon, and coaching these athletes and being a personal trainer. So meshing all of those things into the wellness coaching and kind of helping people navigate their own wellness journey, especially women who are perimenopausal, menopausal, and postmenopausal. That is a conversation that we are just not having. So I definitely want to have those open conversations with women, especially since our bodies are kind of transitioning, our hormones are fluctuating, and things are not really spoken openly in our community about what goes on in our bodies at this age.
I'm not sure if you've seen the interview that we did with Miss Mildred White, but she's an older track athlete. She's very much still active. Like, she does line dances and everything. But those were kind of some of the things that she mentioned. I asked her about getting older and maintaining a healthy lifestyle, things of that nature. And she gave some really good advice. But for those who aren't inclined to stay healthy, or life events have happened for them, who are also in that realm of perimenopausal, what advice would you give them as it relates to even just getting started or transitioning back into healthy behaviors, healthy habits, etc.?
The most important thing is getting started. That getting started can look any way you want it to look. Find something you enjoy. If you enjoy line dancing, start doing some line dancing once a week. It's the small steps that make the giant leaps. And so I think a lot of people think that they have to be on a regimen as soon as they decide that this is what they want to do. It could be as simple as, if you're working at a desk all day and don't really get to move, it's as simple as standing up and just doing 10 squats at your desk. It's about just finding a way to move your body, and then that moving of the body, contracting your muscles, does something in the muscles and send a chemical to your brain, and that alters your mind state. You start to feel better. It's just getting moving, doing something. And it doesn't have to be a whole lot. I think a lot of people think that you have to go to the gym and get a membership. It doesn't have to be that way. Just start something, start small, and then it can lead to something bigger.
So where did this passion for perimenopausal coaching, etc., come from?
For personal experiences, the last few years, I had a day spa in Eugene, Oregon. I burnt out and I moved back here. I was probably going through perimenopause then, but I was just so busy. I didn't have time enough to even slow down and notice what was going on with my body. Luckily, I was afforded the opportunity where I could take a year off and just sit and rest and recover. That's when I noticed things started happening. I'm like, wait, what is happening right now? And so I've started like incontinence. And it's crazy that I'm having this conversation, but I think we should not be embarrassed about things that are going on with our bodies. But I started trying to figure out what is going on with that. Body composition. I've always been an avid runner or sprinter. I'm not a runner. I sprint. I do everything fast. And I've always lifted. I never stopped doing that. But I noticed that my body started changing, and I'm like, I've been plant-based for the last 5 years. So I know it's not what I eat, because I don't eat processed foods. I don't eat sugars. I don't do all of those things. And so the next thing, it just dawned on me. I was like, oh, you're going through some changes. And then I started reading some books that a client gave me back when I was in Oregon. And it was just right on time. It helped me to kind of navigate what I was going through, time periods to eat, when I should and should not be fasting, and things of that nature. So it just opened up this whirlwind of knowledge. And I kind of went down this rabbit hole. And now it's a passion of mine. And I want to tell everybody about it, that you don't have to deal with the body composition. There's some things that you can do that can kind of change. It's not going to be easy, but if body composition is a thing, I had to get back into almost training like I was training when I was actually running track. A lot of weight bearing exercises, a lot of plyos and bounding. That really got my body back into looking normal, or what I thought it should look like. I definitely went down that rabbit hole, and I've experienced it myself and been doing a lot of research and talking to a lot of people about it.
So the one thing you mentioned, but you didn't verbalize, is you turn your passion into a business. For those people who are entrepreneurs, a gentleman we interviewed last week is a serial entrepreneur. To be quite frank, Jackie, I think you are too. So what advice do you have for people who want to turn their passion into their business?
Well, I think it's a passion, but I think it's also your gift. It's like you are sharing your gift to the world and you're monetizing it. When you work in your passion or work in your gift, you truly, I know it's cliche, but you never truly feel like you're working a day in your life. You're just really going through the day doing what you love. And again, like I never thought I would be one of those people, advising people on exercise and all of that. I just thought I would be a person that does it and maybe lead by example. But this is definitely a passion. I have a lot of information. I want to share it. I want to share it to as many people as I possibly can. So that's why being on platforms like this and being on social media is really important.
Speaking of social media, why don't you tell us what projects or businesses you have that are about to launch and where we can find you on social media?
I have a website, jjwellnesscoaching.com, where you can find my blog. I actually have a really cool blog post dropping tomorrow. It's about the gut mind connection, and it's how to enhance focus, how to enhance your mental health, and how all of this stuff is really connected. So please visit my website at jjwellnesscoaching.com and subscribe so you can get access to my blog. You can also find me on Instagram at jjwellness_coaching. And I'm also on LinkedIn for any practitioners. I am always looking for practitioners to refer my clients out, any mental health professionals, any nutritionists, dietitians, physical therapists. I'm always looking to network and kind of branch out.
Well, that's awesome. Jackie, well, I would like to thank you for stopping by and speaking with us today here at Project Transition. Be sure to visit her at her website, subscribe to her blog. Also follow her on Instagram, connect with her on LinkedIn as well. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Project Transition's website is ptransition.org. I am Dr. Lakendra Red Smith, Health Sector Director of Project Transition under the direction and leadership of Dr. Joaquin Wallace. Thank you for watching and listening.